Let's talk about musical influences, Matt. Like, because I think that part of the cool thing to me about us is that we've come from very different worlds, but there's a lot of overlap at the same time.
There is.
So tell me about like when you first started into music. What were your influences?
I mean, I heard, like everybody does, your parents' albums. So
Not like everybody does. You have cooler parents than most people. So
maybe like a lot of but a lot of people, even if they don't have parents that they might have listened to Lawrence Welk, but you heard it. I mean,
right? True.
And it may have sucked, and it may have made you say, "I'm not listening to Lawrence Welk. I'm listening to Ozzy." But yeah, they had they were huge Beatles fans.
Just stop right there.
Yeah.
Because that was not my experience at all. Like you said, even if it's music that you don't necessarily like, my mom liked some music. She liked John Denver.
Yeah, my mom did too. We had a mix of all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
And she had some albums. Dad,
nothing.
Really. And it's still to that day, and it's weird. And he's got some music in him. Like he'll mess with like a harmonica and whatever, but
he doesn't like just consume it.
Zero.
I don't understand.
Zero. And it's weird to me even now.
Well, I've always thought that was weird because when you talk to people and you say, well, I really like music. And I always think, well, why would you even have to say that? Because I think everybody does.
Yeah,
right, but they don't. I mean,
no,
not
really
everybody.
Don't.
So, yeah, that's anathema to me. I don't really fully understand that. But so yeah, I came from
Beatles.
I did. Well, and I also came from
that's rich.
A musical family, really on both sides. My grandfather, I didn't find this out till I was older, but my dad's father, he played organ. He had a Hammond organ in the house, and he would always play that. He'd play these...
A Hammond organ in the house?
Yeah.
Who has a Hammond organ in the house?
He did.
That's badass.
But he played a lot, Christmas carols and some older music, Polish music. This stuff Polish Christmas carols nobody's ever heard.
But you got to be passionate to have all that rig in the house.
Yeah. But it turns out I figured, that's his thing. He was an organist always. But no, he was a drummer in polka bands and other types of bands back in the 30s. He grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, and they'd gig in New Haven and New York. And he had all these stories about it was him, and he was the drummer. There was a violinist and an accordionist, and they'd play restaurants, but they had a model... I guess it was a Model A that had a rumble seat, and the guy that played the violin was a professor at a college, and him and the other guy were younger guys. They'd make him sit in the rumble seat in the back in the winter and get snowed on and all this. But anyway, so he was a drummer and a professional musician, and then my grandmother forbade that, so he was unable to pursue that. But anyway, so I guess then he bought his Hammond organ in the 50s and kept that. And then my other side of my family, everybody was a musician on that side. My grandfather, all of his brothers, they'd get together. I remember New Year's Eves, every one of them. My grandfather played guitar and piano. They all sang. Uncle Harold had the big chromatic harmonica with the weird buttons and all this. Yeah,
the Stevie Wonder harmonica.
Something. Yeah, the big giant thing. And then my Uncle Gilbert had a couple old Gibson guitars and Fender amps, and so I grew up with that. My uncle, my mom's brother, was a drummer. Jazz drummer. He was in the Air Force jazz band. And he introduced me, we're finally getting to the influence part. He introduced me to jazz and jazz fusion, specifically Pat Metheny, Weather Report.
This is a drummer?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. So he was like a Cobham fan and like that kind of stuff?
Yeah. He was a rock and roll fan too. I mean,
really?
he saw Hendrix back in the day. He graduated high school in 70, I think, and or 68, 69, something like that. But he would always, for my birthday, buy records for me, which I've still got some, early Heavy Weather, 1978 Weather Report album.
How old were you when you got that?
It wasn't when it came out. It was a couple of years later. It was probably 79 or 80. I was probably 10 or 11.
Still, wow.
And he would take me to gigs and let me help him set up. And he used to take me to drum shops. We'd go to Hartford to Charlie Donnelly's drum shop, and he hanging out with drummers and stuff. And I was a kid. I didn't really understand it, but I thought it was cool to be able to go to bars and help him set up drums and PA equipment and stuff when I was 10, 12 years old. And my parents didn't think it was a good idea. And
that's a good reminder to me, at least, And I want to pay that forward, that we have a huge influence on whoever we're talking to. I mean, we just do, especially younger people who are around us. You don't have any clue what's going to happen later on. But I'm sure your uncle, he was just like, hey, this is cool to me. Let me show you.
Right. And then you found out that I kind of liked it.
Yeah.
And I was, playing guitar at the time. And I actually was taking lessons from these old Italian guys in town that he used to do pickup gigs with and stuff when he was still before he went into the Air Force. So he knew the brothers that I played with, and they used to play Army, Navy, and so I'd get to go sit in on some of those. My uncle would come to town on leave from the Air Force, and they'd play at the Army Navy Club, a gig with these old Italian guys, and they'd make me go up there and play some fake Les Paul, and then my guitar teacher was playing accordion, my uncle's playing drums, and his brother's playing a mandolin or what, just weird gigs like that, and they'd let me play a song or two when I was 10, 11 years old. But that was my first kind of exposure to playing in front of people. So, but
the progressive stuff or the fusion stuff, it got you?
Yes, absolutely got me.
Because you thought it was what your uncle thought was cool, or you actually
but I started listening to it and I was like, I get this. And I mean, I didn't know how to play it, of course, and I just got that it was different and it was cool. And then that kind of always pushed me to this path that I wasn't ever really attuned to what was going on in popular music at the time. So I missed, unlike you, Van Halen and Priest and Maiden and all that stuff at the time.
Were you pushing it away, or you just
I think I was
pointed towards it?
Yeah, more of that.
Yeah, okay.
And then I'd hear people talk about it at school and stuff. I was like, whatever. But then I started listening to Frank Zappa, and honestly, I don't know how. Nobody specific comes to mind, but I tried to get to go to the Zappa concert in '84.
How did you hear that, though? I feel like Zappa doesn't come on the radio. Like, someone had to turn you on to Zappa, no?
Maybe not. Probably, but I just don't remember who. And maybe it was my uncle, but he's not a huge Zappa fan like I am. But that was one of my biggest influences starting as a young teenager. So 83, 84 is when I discovered him. So I was 14-ish. Just his guitar playing. And Hendrix was huge with me and from my uncle. And my parents had some compilation albums, I believe, that had some Hendrix stuff on it that I always liked. But that was kind of the gateway to me really getting interested in guitar and really starting to play. But again, I was missing the context of what was going on, the current popular stuff. So I wasn't really hearing Dio, and I wasn't really hearing. I got into that stuff later.
I think that's why you and I get along, because I'm fascinated by that, and how, because that seems very intentional to me. It doesn't seem like you were just like you're not paying attention. You were paying attention to something over here specifically, and like we've been able to turn each other on to this stuff over the years. That's been really cool.
I've had a boss when I was working for Washington Mutual, and he used to give me a hard time about that. Like, well, he asked me about a certain band. He's like, you won't hear about them for another 10 or 15 years. So, something that was going on. And he's right, because the grunge thing I didn't hear till later. And because I was always like hyper focused on what I was interested in. And that was that, and everything else sucked. But I liked Rush. I got into Rush some early on. But it was more classic stuff, more older stuff that I was into.
And I felt like when I first met you that like you were one of those guys, like I liked you immediately, but I felt like you were one of those guys who was kind of elitist. Like, okay, like the only things that are, only legit
it's not so
stuff.
much that as I just didn't know this other stuff.
Well, that's what I soon realized. Like, okay, no, he's open to all kind of cool stuff. And now, all the time, like on the reg, you're sending me screenshots of your XM radio where you're listening to like Judas Priest or something, like while you're driving to work, Triumph, right? It's something like you're like, what? Like, and you're like, what is this? This I've never heard this before.
Or I'd get turned on to it a little bit later. Fast forward to like high school and after, when I would get in a band,
right?
And I could play, but I didn't know a lot of the stuff the other people knew. So they'd be like,
"Here, learn this."
And I'd be like, "What is this?" And I'd start playing. Oh, that's cool. And then I'd start to discover other stuff by that artist. And they're like, "Man, that's 10 years old." But I was like, "Yeah, it's new to me."
It's new to me, right?
But yeah, and then I really got into jazz, and then the more progressive rock stuff when I was in probably a freshman and sophomore in high school. The old progressive rock, King Crimson, Yes, really old Genesis, Foxtrot era and before. So that was my jam too. You know, the Steve Hackett, Steve Howe.
Right.
Then any offshoot.
Pre-Trevor Rabin, yes.
Yeah. Any offshoot of King Crimson, like anybody that was ever in King Crimson or had anything to do with it, I totally dug that. You know, the Bruford stuff, which is what got me into Alan Holdsworth, Jeff Berlin. You know, even back in the day, we could get down the rabbit hole, but it was usually by talking to somebody or reading magazines or whatever. It wasn't the internet, because we didn't have that, but scouring record stores for stuff. We used to go to a lot of, back home, would go to a lot of used record stores all over the state and take the bus to New York City and go to the Village and just try to find the most obscure record stores possible. And that's what we did on the weekends. So.
And so, to contrast that, I, like I said, grew up with no real musical influence at all. We've got a family friend. It's my mom's best friend, Lynn. And we called her Aunt Lynn, though she was not my mom's sister, but it was like that. So it was Aunt Lynn, and she was like a 60s songstress. Mm-hmm. Like, she loved Joni Mitchell and Joan Baez. Like, and so she had her guitar, and she would bring it to, we had a lake house. We grew up a little dinky lake house, but that was a kind of a meeting place. And so she'd bring and play these things. And then her son, Scott, he became a guitar player. And so, like, we grew up together, but, like, he was, I guess, 4 years older than me. He was my absolute idol. And so he was, learning from his mom, but then, like, Kiss. Right. And, like he got into all this stuff, and he was, like, the guy with the low-slung Les Paul, and, like, I just thought, I was like, this guy's unbelievable. And so I wanted to be just like him, and I wanted to, he was the one who, when I joined the Columbia House Record and Tape Club, I immediately went to him and said, who should I listen to? And he had a tremendous influence on me at that point. I'm
putting that penny in there. That's very
right. It was 1 cent.
Right.
And you got 12 albums.
But then you had to pay, so it was an expensive purchase for a kid. Over time, you had to buy X number more over the next year.
Right. And then they would send you one automatically every month.
And it was some crappy thing that you didn't want.
And then you had to send it back, and it was a hassle, and I don't know how I talked my parents.
They probably tried sending you, what year this, again, you said 80?
81 maybe. But he suggested specifically artists like Black Sabbath.
Pablo Cruz.
No Pablo Cruz. Van Halen, Aerosmith, Rush, Ted Nugent, which you expressed a little disdain for, which is understandable. I mean, but
mostly because of now. But yeah,
sure.
I had double live Gonzo. I did.
Okay, so, there you go.
That's the only Nugent, and I did. Yeah, I've got a soft place in my heart for Stranglehold. But
right. So, and I had, because it was, it wasn't long before I transferred over to cassettes. Albums was my first 12, but then it was cassettes started becoming a thing. I had a little Walkman, and there was a Nugent album. I can't think of the name of it all of a sudden, but there was a song on there that it's got one of those memories attached to it where I'm like in the back of our van riding to our lake house with headphones on, and it was just, oh God, I almost had it. Death by Misadventure.
Don't know that one. That was the song or
Good
the album?
name of the song. No, that was the name of the song. Huh. So I have to look that up and see. So I started getting real stoked about that, and then got down this rabbit hole of rock music. That's what drew me in originally, was big guitars, but I had a little bit of sprinkled in of like progressive stuff with the Rush album. And
what was the first Rush album?
Moving Pictures was the first one, which is probably a pretty good starting point. But it's a dividing line between the earlier Rush and forward. I really feel like that's the one. It's the new era, but it had me interested in definitely some different tonalities than you were hearing on like an Aerosmith album, for sure. But so that kind of hard rock vibe was what initially hooked me in. And then our family melted down. Mom moved away. Dad moved to Virginia. So we ended up with him for whatever reason, me and my little brother, Gavin. We ended up with him in Virginia. And all I really had at that point in my mind, it was 10th grade. It was the summer between 9th and 10th grade when all this happened. And so we went to live with Dad, and I brought my guitar and my amp and my little brother, and we were living with my grandparents. So it was my dad's parents, and we were living in like a side bedroom just for the summer, so we thought. But then by the end of the summer, mom was like, you know what? I'm going to do my thing for a little while longer. You guys stay with Dad. Which, God bless her, she had no idea how much of an impact that was going to have on me. But, like, I had to start this new school, you know, like in 10th grade. Like, what? And so it was an absolute, it was like the eject button.
See, it's funny because that was, and I can see how that would be traumatic and stuff, but mine, I started a new school in 10th grade too.
Did you really?
But it was the best thing that ever could have happened because I went from 4 years of Catholic school.
10th grade was your first year
then
not
I got
Catholic?
Yep, I got in some trouble. And then I was
I don't think I know this story.
oh yeah, I get to go back with all my friends. No.
Okay. But you got kicked out of Catholic school? Please, just say it, even if it didn't happen. Say that.
Yes, but they called it non-readmission. I was invited not to go back. It was. I got a letter, and it said,
not.
It was something. It was. I forget how it was worded, but it was absolutely. It was.
Were your parents pissed?
No, there's some backstory to that. There was some.
They had to. They're cool.
I got kind of a shady deal from Father Charbonneau, so how you doing? Anyway, but it is funny how that can be a good. But again, it was a different situation. I was going back to
for something.
I was going back to public school that I hadn't been since 6th grade. So I did 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th Catholic school, and then I got to go back, and that's when I started getting in bands and doing. I was trying freshman year. I tried.
Yeah,
but I don't want to diverge too far from what you were talking about.
Man, that's it.